Most of us spend a quarter of our lives in the place we call school. And the more time we spend there, the more we complain.
It's no secret that the schooling system in America has flaws. So, join us once a month as we take a look at the ins and outs of American schooling to find the bad and the good.
Let's get started then. I'm Amar.
I'm Matthew.
And this is Our Side of the Coin, Season 2. Hey, welcome back to another week on Our Side of the Coin. This week, we're going to be talking about learning both inside and outside of school, with an emphasis on tutoring. Matt, take it away.
So we're just going to be talking about ways students, like some parents might decide to try to give their students more learning opportunities outside of school. But for context with that, we thought it would be a good idea to just discuss the average school day, just standard, to be able to figure out where tutoring would be able to slot into that.
Right. And so in the United States, at least for most public school students, what a typical day looks like from elementary all the way till you graduate high school is you would wake up sometime between 6 and 8 a.m. depending on your school. You would head to school around, 7 to 9 a.m. Okay, and so after you have classes for a couple of hours, most students will head to lunch, depending on what school you're going to. You may have a recess, you may not have a recess. You'll head back to school, classes, and by 3 p.m., you basically run the entire school day as normal. Classes may vary from different places. They could be up 4 classes of 90 minutes to 7 classes of 50 minutes. It just depends really on the school you're going and the curriculum they're following throughout the U.S. But after school is where stuff gets a little bit interesting. So in high school, and we'll touch on this a little bit later this season, many students will go either play a sport or do an extracurricular activity of their choosing, probably for most both, depending on the high school they're going to. But once you get home, for a lot of students, and this may be more age dependent, a lot of students head out to go either get some tutoring or chill or do something of their own fancy. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about that aspect of tutoring and whether we need it. Matt, what are your thoughts on tutoring? Initial impressions?
I think they say actions speak louder than words, and my opinion on tutoring is pretty clear. After I admit that I have not really done any tutoring in my education history, but I've been around. I've just been around it a lot, I suppose, because lots of people I knew do it, but it was just never something that my family decided was worth it.
Yeah, and I think I'm quite a bit on the opposite side of the spectrum there, right? Where, so you may never have done much tutoring, but I think from a very young age, whether it was religiously based tutoring or academic, most of it was academic, math, and reading based tutoring for myself. And I'm not talking about for supplemental help. It was usually for some families, it's either if a student needs tutoring, that's a different story. But a lot of families in America have the ideology that their student needs to get tutoring to get ahead of the curve, despite the American public system holding everybody on one consistent curve, no matter how far ahead or how far behind they fall. So my experience with tutoring is roughly, growing up, around 3rd grade, I started this program. It was at this place called the Indus Center for Academic Excellence it was in somewhere around Detroit. And so what these guys would do is they would offer 3rd to 5th graders. I don't know if you've ever heard of the Math Olympiads, but, they were offering essentially training for these Math Olympiads. And mind you, these Math Olympiads were made for 8th, 9th grade, elite level mathematicians, right? And so they were trying to teach 3rd graders and 5th graders how to do this stuff. So I remember sitting in this classroom every Saturday morning for about 2.5 years, just holding my head they're teaching linear algebra, and dude, I don't even know what a variable is, right? So after that, I went through 2 years of that, and then I think from about 6th to 8th grade, I did a couple of years of Kumon. I think that's going to be a very generic response that you'll hear from a lot of people who are able to afford Kumon or choose to do Kumon. Kumon tends to be a common tutoring site. So what we'll talk about, I guess, today is we'll focus on if it really helps at all. My question to you, Matt, is do you think tutoring would have helped you throughout high school or maybe further in your career path?
That's an interesting question. Honestly, I think I would probably be in the same place not having done tutoring, because I was really fortunate to go to schools which I would say had good curriculums. My like elementary / middle school was like pretty solid, and high school we've discussed a lot. Mm-hmm. So I don't think like I was missing anything really. That's like what I would say. I feel like I got a pretty good like the baseline schooling I was getting was substantial enough. I think what would have happened if my parents had decided to put me in tutoring is simply that I just would have done the content a little bit sooner, and then I just would have been less focused in class. I think that would really be the only change.
So, that's a little interesting that you say that, right? Because what ended up happening to me, because I largely took tutoring extra supplemental stuff outside of school to get ahead of the curve between about 3rd to 7th, 8th grade. And I think that's like the period essentially where I was always ahead of the curve as well, right? So I ended up taking in, like, even from 4th grade, I got like a couple, like 1 or 2 grades ahead in math, to the point that in 8th grade, like I was taking Algebra 2 and about to test out a pre-calc so I could take AP Calc in 9th grade if I had stayed with the public school system. Naturally, I transferred over to Y-High and I got locked into the IB curriculum, which is a different topic for another time, but which kind of rendered getting ahead of the curve almost useless, because now you're locked into something like an IB diploma program, which forces you to take a certain math course at a certain time, right?
There's just a hard barrier.
Yeah, exactly, right? So, I mean, public schools, it was a little more flexible. You're not locked into an AP program, A-levels, GED, IB, nothing like that, right? So, and that was the point where I got ahead. Do I think tutoring itself really made a difference? I don't, that's a really hard question, right? Because, so what I gathered from, and I'll break this down into 2 segments, right? So you have the 3rd to 5th grade segment where I was taking the courses at ICAE, which were well beyond the scope of my understanding. I would be optimistic to say I was understanding 10% of what was going on in those classrooms, right? But, forcing a kid to take problems that he has no idea how to do, and it's not super high stakes either, right? It's not going to impact his future. He's a young kid. Forcing or giving a kid these sorts of character. Builds character. Yeah. In a way, yeah. And I think what it does help you do is it kind of does, you start to get inquisitive with, I remember, staring at geometry problems, like high school level geometry problems in 3rd grade from these things. I would have no idea what I was doing, but I'd be like, hey, cool. Now, I could kind of figure out how to take the area of a semicircle because XYZ, right? And that was cool to me at the time because, I had barely figured out what the area for a regular circle was. So having the revelation that a semicircle's area is half the area of a full circle was like mind-blowing to a 3rd graders for some reason. But, and I think that might have built a foundation for inquisition and curiosity. Do I think it's like an end-all be-all? Not at all. I do think there are plenty of people, and honestly what I found helped me, like if I really wanted to get ahead of the curve, wanting to get ahead of the curve is another debate on its own, right? Do we even need to get ahead of the curve if the public school system is going to restrict how far you can go with that? But to getting ahead of the curve, what I found most helpful was just, reading up on the next courses, like test out of these middle level math courses, pre-algebra, algebra, geometry, stuff like that. Just reading over, doing those problems instead of trying to do 10th grade math in 3rd grade was much more beneficial to somebody who wants to get ahead. I guess, but that brings up the point, is there a point in like getting ahead of the curve at least in the American public school system? What are your thoughts on that?
That was going to be my next question, but just, I wanted to say, so like the thing you said, I think that can go one of 2 ways. Either it's like a preview for like what you're going to learn later in math and it can get you excited. Or, the pattern of of not feeling like you ever know anything in math starts early and it just discourages people. I could see it going both ways.
Yeah, definitely.
But yeah, the going ahead of the curve idea, because like that's the one thing I've always heard as like to why do people go to tutoring, and it's something, I'll be honest, I've never really understood. I don't see what the purpose of being like 3 math classes ahead of where you are is when you still have to do 8 years of elementary / middle school and 4 years of high school. It's like you're gonna even if you get far, I feel like eventually you're just gonna be reset, like what happened to Y High. Like maybe you'll get more progress if you go to a normal AP school, but I feel like eventually your progress is gonna be reset. Like I think like if you're not literally skipping grades, which is possible, but if you're not literally doing that, then I don't really see what the benefit is.
Right, and I guess the counter to that is, I mean, there's always the hypothetical situation, right, that you end up going to a consistent school system that doesn't inhibit, and like out of, that one lucky shot that, all your credits transfer to college, you could potentially, walk into college and not have to take XYZ courses. And I suppose that's the point of the AP and IB program in general, to get you those, at least make college a little bit easier.
Walk into college as a junior.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that has its pros and cons too, if you really want to, because college is also considered, at least in America, a transitional period for a lot of students. Unless, you want to go to grad school or med school or law school, which in case it's a waste of time, but that's a different topic. And, but yeah, I think
somebody's angry.
I am quite upset that, America has a system that requires you to spend a lot of extra time just as a weeder.
Story for another time.
Yeah, story for another time. You might need to edit that out. Anyway, yeah, so I mean, it could work out. And like you said, in those fortunate circumstances, what I actually kind of found end up happening in my personal experience was I went to high school, right, at Y High, and for 9th and 10th grade, the math was stuff I had done quite literally like years ago, and it wasn't hard at all, and you no longer stimulated your brain with math, and then all of a sudden you take a course like Math HL, which forces you to re-stimulate your brain like very quickly, right, and now you're lost, you're gone, adios, right? you relax so much that you stop forcing yourself to learn math after a certain point. And this is obviously a specific situation, right? Obviously, this isn't going to be your typical response from a student, or this isn't going to be what you could normally would see. Everybody's math journey in the United States, because it's so, I guess, to politely put it, diverse in terms of curriculums and everything, is going to be quite different. But that in my experience, it just, getting ahead of the curve, and then that hard reset will hit you harder than it might hit most other.
I think the benefit of supplemental education isn't getting ahead. I think the place it can be really good is if your school isn't getting you to where you should be. Like if your school is insufficient, I think tutoring could be a good like place to get you to where you're supposed to be. But I think there's more harm than good that comes with getting ahead with tutoring. Like I said before, I don't think you can stay ahead forever. Eventually, you're going to have to learn new things in the class, and then if you're not ready for it, then it can be like a sudden change. But I also think that it can be, it kind of ruins doing learning in school in the time that you're ahead. Well, because my 8th grade math teacher had some very strong opinions about tutoring and Kumon and things, because she would be teaching her math class, and there would be people sitting in her class just goofing off, not paying attention at all, because they learned this all last year in Kumon, and then she would just she would go at them and their parents because it's their parents basically just spent money to have their children be disruptive in class.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point. And I think this might actually be, we might have found another, true fault within the school system in America, is that it's not quite flexible in, allowing students to progress. If a student, and I think this public school system that I attended when I was in elementary and middle school was great about this. I mean, my parents had to get involved to make this happen, right? But to allow students, and they did a wonderful job coordinating. And what ended up happening, the whole story was, right, in about 6th grade, I just tested out of 6th or 7th. I don't remember the specifics. Right? I tested out of one of those math courses, with a high score on, I took all 3 final exams for that class before the year started, right? So during that year, I was able to take a higher level of grade. So in 7th grade, when I had to go to when I was taking high school level courses that weren't offered at the middle school, right? Where I can't take Algebra 1, because the 8th graders would take Algebra 1. I would just sit in with the 8th graders and take that class with them. What they ended up offering us was an opportunity, and so at the time, for me, it was in 7th grade, and I was with 3 other 8th graders who also had a similar situation where they tested it out a year or two ahead, right? So they would offer us a bus back from the high school. So our parents would drop us off for the morning class at 7:35 at the high school, and we would attend that class for whatever it was, 70 minutes. And then they would offer us a bus to come back to the middle school and take the rest of our classes. And I think that sort of system where you're allowed to progress once you're learning, you don't have to stop learning. You can keep stimulating your brain, keep learning in the classroom environment. I think that was the ideal situation. Sadly, though, for most of the United States systems, it's too much of a hassle for the public school systems to give those few, students a push up, or the students at the bottom who need like a little bit of extra help. They don't always have those resources to give them the extra help without, you need to hold back the entire grade just because your math grade sucks. Like that tends to be the solution where, you failed this one class, instead of giving you supplemental aid, we're just going to hold you back the whole grade, right? So I think it can work. It can work. And I think this is just a genuine fault within how American public school systems are set up, where they want to box off students by their age or year, right? And moving them around, at least until you get to high school, and there are different options and extracurriculars. And once you get to college, it's basically a free-for-all. You do what you want to get where you want, when you want, right? But and to provide that structure for younger students, they sacrifice, the ability to stimulate those excelling students and the ability to support the students who aren't able to keep up as quickly.
I would agree. I think in an ideal world, schooling works like tutoring, where the pace of your school is directly corresponding to each individual student, which is impossible if you have more than one student. But I think tutoring is kind of like a half solution that's come up because of that fact. But the problem is, people who we're not talking about being homeschooled or hiring a tutor to teach you all of school. We're talking about doing school and doing some tutoring. Right. And I think in that specific scenario, I don't think they work together as well as you would want them to.
Yeah. So, I agree with you on that point, right? If you have that situation where you have students getting ahead and just sitting in a classroom and wasting their time all day, bored out of their mind, right? You're not really helping the student at all by offering them extra tutoring. What needs to be ensured if you want to get your students ahead? And I think tutoring itself isn't inherently a bad thing, right? I think tutoring itself has the potential to, if a student wants to learn more and their school isn't teaching them, that's great, right? If a student is learning to read at a high school level in 7th, 8th grade, or wants to get ahead and learn, more advanced topics, things like Khan Academy, things like tutoring, if affordable, are great assets to help them stimulate their mind, right? But this is given that they're already naturally gifted and ahead, right? Forcing your student to get ahead via tutoring isn't going to really help them much, in my opinion, because it's going to essentially, like you said, you're going to hit that roadblock somewhere. And then school is no longer going to be a stimulus for them to continue to learn and engage. And this also kind of ties in with that idea of neuroplasticity, right? Where you have to be continuously challenging your brain in order to form those new connections, right? If you take a pause with any subject, it could be a language, it could be math. Math itself is kind of a language. It could be science, right? If you just don't do it for a while, what happens when you come back to it in 2-3 years? All of a sudden, all the processes that were in your head that were formed as a result of you doing the stimuli are gone, right? Your brain no longer has a biological need for them, so it forms connections that are more important to it at the times before it. Now all of a sudden you're lost because you're ahead. You were once ahead of the curve, and now you're trying to keep up with the curve, but your brain couldn't keep up because they stopped forming those new connections as well. Well, thank you for listening to another week on Our Side of the Coin. We will try to upload a little more regularly. We are sorry about that. We just have a lot of finals and schoolwork and college going on right now. So stay tuned. Let us know what you guys think, and we'll see you next time.
All right. I'm going to press stop.